If you ask any racing driver across any racing series, would you like to drive for the Red Bull F1 team?
Max, what's happened?
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier.
99% of them will say yes. It's like asking me if one of my videos is going to contain the little yippee creature guy, obviously about 50 times over. This is because Red Bull have earned their pick of whichever driver they want by winning a lot.
Max Verstappen wins the Sao Paulo Grand Prix.
In 2023, they literally won to the point that the Austrian and Dutch national anthem would be constantly playing in my head, as if I was some kind of sleeper agent ready to go drink 500 litres of caffeine in a can. Nah, I'm sorry, but genuinely, I don't even drink Red Bull because it literally tastes like liquefied Haribo Tang Fast Sticks. If you know, you know. Anyway, everyone in racing wants to win, otherwise they'd be pretty bad at their job, which is why almost everybody wants to race for Red Bull, a winning team. If you know the theory of supply and demand, though, you'll know that when there's a lot of competition for a certain job, you can kind of treat the person currently in that job like shit. And that is pretty much what Red Bull have been doing, with a few exceptions we'll talk about. Obviously, we know they'd sooner tie Verstappen's shoelaces for him than let him go. But first, you've got to understand how Red Bull actually ended up in the situation they're in. And that takes us back to 2005. The big Red Bulls themselves actually first decided to invest in Formula One all the way back in 1995, where they started out as a sponsor for Sauber. And this did give us the Sauber livery that's just an amalgamation of Formula One teams. You've got the Red Bull sponsor, the Petronas sponsor, which if you don't know are currently Mercedes' main sponsor. It was a Ferrari powered car. It was obviously a Sauber.
Well, no fucking shit.
I mean, talk about foreshadowing for who the top three teams were going to be coming into the 2010s. But by the big old 2005, Red Bull decided they were ready to venture off from just being a sponsor and actually start a Formula One team themselves. So they went and bought the Jaguar F1 team for £1, which is what I'll tell you if this was YouTube Shorts. Thankfully, if you're watching this, you have slightly more of an attention span than a YouTube Shorts user. Only slightly more because you are watching me and it's an overstimulating as hell video. But that £1 purchase of an F1 team did come with a little bit of fine print for the Red Bull buyers. Well, they were like, yeah, you can buy us for £1, but also we need £400 million of investment over 3 seasons. Okay, sounds fair enough. Red Bull agreed to pay that £400 million over the 3 seasons, and from the very get-go, they had a very strange management of their drivers.
Massive knobhead.
This is because even prior to running their Formula One team, Red Bull have always been funding a huge amount of junior drivers throughout the Junior Formula Series. So unlike other new teams in Formula One, they had quite a large catalogue of drivers already there to pick from. It's a lot like now where the amount of Red Bull liveries you see on the F2 grid genuinely rivals the worst iRacing lobby you've ever been in. So, interestingly, for the first season of F1 Red Bull ever took part in, they actually had 3 full-time drivers over their 2 cars. David Coulthard was the lead driver, and he'd moved over from the Jaguar team to join Red Bull. And if you know anything about DC, he was a very capable, strong driver, a good pair of hands to have. Then Christian Klein would also be moving over from Jaguar, but was meant to be swapping every single race with Viantonio Liuzzi. I genuinely have no idea if I just said that right, but that has got to be the most Italian name I've ever heard. You genuinely might as well have just called him Pizza Pasta Spaghetti. Anyway, by the end of the season, Red Bull must have changed their mind because Liuzzi had only made 4 appearances. For their first year, by the way, Red Bull weren't even that bad. They managed a few top 5s, even a couple 4th place finishes with DC, and they were 7th in the championship with 34 points, and only 4 points off 6th place, which were Honda. So a decent start for a brand new F1 team. But now, going into 2006, But now, going into 2006, we get another really important piece of Red Bull lore. Given that their junior teams were absolutely filled with drivers, Red Bull decided this. Number 1, they didn't like having money. And number 2, they were going to buy a second Formula One team. And this second team was purely to train young drivers up and put them into the first team. The first 2 drivers to ever drive this silly little Italian car named Toro Rosso was the aforementioned Viantonio Liuzzi and Scott Speed, who, okay, listen, if he didn't become a racing driver, he genuinely wasn't living up to his name. now you sort of know how Red Bull started with this two-team layout, I am going to skip ahead a little bit. So I'm really sorry that Sebastian Vettel's 2008 win in a Toro Rosso, which meant Toro Rosso got their maiden win before the Red Bull main team did, which meant Vettel got a promotion to a team that had actually done worse in 2008. I'm sorry, that story won't get mentioned, but it kind of did now, but that's not the point. Into the 2010s, all I have to say is Red Bull had found their first prodigy driver, Sebastian Vettel. And looking at how absolutely stacked the Red Bull lineups were, I think we can say that their system was going pretty successfully. Obviously, we know that Webber and Vettel was a highly successful pairing for the Red Bull team, taking the 4 world titles between 2010 and 2013. But in Red Bull's junior team, Toro Rosso, there was also some talent. Sebastian Buemi drove the wheels off the Red Bull in 2010. Yeah, no, that wasn't a metaphor. In all seriousness, Buemi is still really important to Red Bull even to today. He is their main simulator driver and often fixes the setups between FP3 and qualifying. Then going into 2012, we got Jean-Eric Vergne and Daniel Ricciardo taking up the seats in Toro Rosso. In this first year, they were pretty close on track too, which is exactly what Red Bull wanted from their junior teams. If you want to understand Red Bull and you want to understand all the decisions that they make, you've got to know this one thing. That sounds like I'm about to tell you some 5-minute crafts recipe, but no, I'm not going to be telling you how to hide WhatsApps from your wife in less than 20 seconds. Sorry, Christian Horner, who's just clicked off this video. Seriously though, Red Bull really like drivers who are confident. They want them to be feisty and aggressive. You'll notice that the majority of drivers promoted from Red Bull's junior teams are the ones who are willing to go for risky moves, who aren't afraid to push the car and would likely get onto a couple big incidents on track. But as long as Red Bull think that they can iron out the kinks, they are happy to accommodate. So skipping ahead into 2013, Mark Webber was sick of being a number 2. Not bad for a number 2 driver. And so towards the end of 2013, he announced his retirement, and in 2014, Red Bull had a seat free. And that meant 2013 was a competition. Whoever scored the most points out of Jean-Eric Vergne and Ricciardo would end up getting the Red Bull seat. And to cut a long story short, because we all know what happened, Ricciardo got it. Hey look, they were replacing Australian with Australian, and now this year we're getting a New Zealander. But make sure, viewer, that you never confuse a New Zealander as an Australian, because they will throw their fruity little birds at you. I remember one time at school, this is completely off topic, but we really annoyed a supply teacher because we all thought he was Australian when he was actually from New Zealand. Funny times. We were like 14. What were we meant to know the difference?
Nah, yeah. There's fucking 2 mangoes going for $2
In 2014, Ricciardo was actually quicker than the reigning champ Sebastian Vettel, which prompted Seb to quickly fuck off to Ferrari, and Red Bull had to hire another driver. This here is probably one of the first times Red Bull got a little bit of fight back against who they picked as their drivers. Jean-Eric Vergne was still in Toro Rosso. He'd beaten Ricciardo in their first year together. He'd lost to him in his second, but he wasn't a million miles away. And at the end of 2014, the year of Minecraft and fucking Nyan Cat, Vergne had actually beaten Toro Rosso's new hire, Daniel Kvyat. But for whatever reason, probably Red Bull having made up their mind beforehand or having a Daniel adjacent name only hiring policy, they chose Kvyat.
Came like a torpedo.
A few people were pretty outraged at this, but they were French, so no one listened. And now we can talk about how absolutely stacked the Red Bull lineups were for 2015. Because this is really where shit starts to get crazy, in that Red Bull is a weird employer storyline. So in the main Red Bull team, you had Ricciardo and Kvyat, and they ended up being incredibly close on track, with actually Kvyat being the one to score more points in 2015, not Ricciardo, something a lot of people forget. Then in Toro Rosso, you had Max Verstappen, but not just any Max Verstappen. 17-year-old, I'll crash you into the wall if you don't let me through Max Verstappen. He really did embody the gamer spirit his whole career, didn't he? And then in the other seat, Carlos Sainz, who obviously we know is an incredibly talented driver. So going into 2016, it was clear, even for Helen Keller to see, that Max Verstappen was something special. And this started a series of decisions that basically led to Red Bull building the entire team around him, and led to what some might call a workplace worse than David Brent's office to be in.
Right, time for a look inside Max Verstappen.
In 2016, Red Bull had to move Verstappen into their team as quick as possible, or other teams were just going to poach him. There was already rumors around the paddock of Ferrari and Mercedes making offers to Verstappen. So Red Bull, in what was probably an extremely difficult decision of tossing a coin or running a who has the biggest smile competition, chose to bin off Kvyat for Verstappen and keep Ricciardo. So in 2017, Red Bull looked like this. Red Bull main team, Van Strapon, Ricciardo, Pizza Red Bull, Italian team, Sainz, Kvyat. Until 4 rounds before the end of the season, that's when Sainz realized he wasn't going to get a promotion at Red Bull, and so he pissed off over to Renault. Red Bull also saw Sainz beating Kvyat, so they tossed Kvyat out before the end of the season too. Also got to include how much Kvyat must absolutely despise Verstappen, because not only did he take his Red Bull seat, Max Verstappen then went on to take Kvyat's girlfriend and also now pretty much his daughter as well. By the end of the year, Toro Rosso had a brand new driver lineup than the one they started with, which was Pierre Gasly and Brendan Hartley. And this is maybe where they started to build up that reputation as a revolving door of drivers. Skipping ahead into the 2018 season, Red Bull had relative stability with their drivers. There were no mid-season changes this year, until of course towards the end of the season, Daniel Ricciardo announced his retirement. Of course he did. Why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't Red Bull just have a quiet season? He felt like he was playing second fiddle to Verstappen, and so he'd moved to Renault. It looks like Carlos Sainz was a real inspiration to Ricciardo, considering Sainz moved to Renault, Sainz left Renault, Ricciardo moved to Renault, Sainz moved to McLaren, Sainz left McLaren, Daniel moved to McLaren. It's just a shame Daniel isn't going to get the Ferrari seat anytime soon. Anyway, with Gasly being the convincingly better driver than Brendan Hartley, he was the one to take the seat as Daniel Ricciardo's replacement. And this is where we begin the curse of the second Red Bull seat. In 2019, Paul Pierre really did struggle against Verstappen. And it's a bit of a hot talking point in the F1 scene as to whose fault this actually was. I know it's really easy to just point the blame on the driver, but it might not be.
Racing driver.
Firstly, Pierre did have over a season in Formula 1 when he was given that seat, which I think is more than enough, and Red Bull seem to think is more than enough as well. But we do know in Formula 1 at the moment, rookies get a lot less testing than they used to, so it does take a bit longer to really get into the groove of F1. Gasly typically did finish within the points, which was good, although in the Red Bull never actually managed to finish on the podium, whereas teammate Verstappen was typically finishing on the podium and even fighting for wins. Which I think even if Red Bull weren't expecting that, they wanted Pierre just behind Verstappen in 4th or 5th at worst. So big bad horny Horner chose mid-season to bin off Pierre, well, back down to Toro Rosso, where interestingly after he went back to Toro Rosso, he had his best finish of the season in Brazil and got a 2nd place in the worst car. Was he a bad driver or just in a bad environment is the question a lot of people ask. The decision to drop Pierre again did cause some outrage, but again, they were French, so no one cared. And Red Bull still obviously had an absolute ton of fans and still do. And if you are a Red Bull fan or fan of any Formula 1 team, using code DANNOSKILL10, I can give you 10% off official Formula 1 merch, like this Red Bull merch here, over at V12RS. 10% of whatever you do buy does go back into the channel, so if you're looking to get merch and want to support the channel, it's a great way to do that. And I profusely apologize for this yap, but I gotta keep the lights on. If you still want to support the channel, but merch is a little bit too much, from just 99p a month, you can become a channel member. And again, these guys have done it here. Really appreciate it. So thank you so much. Anyway, Pierre was replaced with rookie Alex Albon, who'd had half a season in the Toro Rosso. Also, for some reason in Toro Rosso, Kvyat was back. What is this?
A crossover episode?
Okay, so into 2020, Albon, who'd had 1 season under his belt, he'd impressed in 2019 in the Red Bull. I mean, surely things wouldn't play out exactly like they did with Pierre, where Red Bull end up hastily dropping a young driver. They did. At least after the outcry last time, Red Bull did give Alex the full 2020 season to try and be competitive. They still chose to get rid of him. And going into 2021, Red Bull had a big decision. What were they going to do? They still had Pierre, but considering that the revolving door Red Bull had been known as was probably being powered by a V8 at this point. So they decided the 2021 lineup would be this. In the Red Bull team, Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, who'd been having an amazing season over in the pink Mercedes at Racing Point. In Toro Rosso, which was named AlphaTauri like a couple years ago or something, I don't care. You had Gasly and brand new Honda placement driver, Yuki Tsunoda. Bear in mind, Gasly was in their development team, had a bit more experience, had won a race in 2020, but as always with Red Bull, good luck getting a second chance. So how did it all go in 2021? Well, Max Verstappen won the World Championship with no controversy whatsoever, although Perez didn't actually quite score enough points for Red Bull to get the Constructors' Championship as well. Quite interestingly, the gap between Perez and Max and the gap between Albon and Max and Pierre and Max was pretty much the same throughout all of this time. Alex actually did go on to the High Performance podcast and explained in his experience why it was so hard to compete with Max Verstappen.
But I like a car that has a good front end, so quite sharp, quite direct. Max does too, but his level of sharp and direct is kind of another. It's a whole different level. It's eye-wateringly sharp. And so what ended up happening was, especially during my year, you start off being a little bit behind, but not by much. And then as the season goes on, Max wants this front end in the car. He wants his car to be sharper. He goes quicker and quicker. And for you to catch up, you have to start taking a little bit more risk. You might be a couple tenths behind one session. Just try a little bit more. Okay, I've gone off. I've had a crash.
And this is really interesting to keep in mind as we look at Red Bull's next hire, and the longest since the Ricciardo days, my Pidal Perez. Basically every year at Red Bull, Sergio had the exact same scenario play out time and time again. He starts the season just behind Verstappen, maybe even matching him at some tracks. And if, as Alex says, Max keeps pushing for more and more front end in the car, Sergio probably started to lose the confidence, get more and more in his own head as the season went on, until he was the Perez we ended up knowing so well. It's an interesting pattern that you can see with all of the drivers. And during Perez's time, I haven't even had a chance to talk about the Toro, Alpha, Visa, V-Bucks, PayPal, Sigma, Balls, I don't even know what it's called. The other team, yeah. Realizing he didn't want the Jean-Eric Kvyat Sainz treatment, Gasly had noped the hell out of Toro Rosso for 2023 in favor of the exploding Francemobile. His replacement was Formula 2 and Formula E champion Nick de Vries, who was also booted out almost immediately. And then back came, for whatever reason, Daniel Ricciardo. Was it 2012 again? Were we gonna get amazing memes like baby with his fist up going, yeah? No, it was 2023, but Danny Ric was doing his best Alonso impression and pretending to be a rookie. Sadly, his comeback was cut short by trying not to kill Oscar Piastri, and he broke his wrist. So then we had Liam Lawson as an interim driver for Daniel Ricciardo.
Every fucking driver, get out of my way! I'm Liam Lawson! I'm Liam Lawson!
Now, as I'd hinted earlier in the video, Red Bull often have a nice little plan for some of their drivers, and they tend to like to stick to that plan even if the results don't necessarily reflect it straight away. What seemed pretty obvious was that Horny Horner and Fiora Marco were almost desperate for Danny Ric to beat Tsunoda, so they could go tuck Tsunoda away in whatever cupboard they'd found him in, swap Perez and Ricciardo, and then bring in Lawson to Alpha Visa Sigma. But Horny and the evil dictator didn't get what they wanted this time, and Yuki beat Ricciardo, so Ricciardo retired again. And then when Liam Lawson came in, Yuki continued to beat him. And Red Bull thought, fuck it. We want Lawson in the Red Bull anyway. So Liam, despite not even competing a full season in F1, has now been promoted to Red Bull. And forgive me for sounding like a broken record, but isn't this exactly what Red Bull have been doing for the past skibbity-illion years? Push out the driver who's struggling, bring in some fresh meat near rookie driver, give them an insane amount of pressure to just deal with, and then if they don't perform, kick them out, rinse and repeat. I do hope that for Liam's sake, Red Bull realizes that Liam does have talent, but he is racing against one of the best drivers in the world right now, Sid the Sloth, and that Liam, as pretty much a rookie, is going to make mistakes, isn't going to be quite on the pace, and will likely need a lot of support from all the pressure he's going to be dealing with mentally, even if it is an amazing opportunity for him. I do think there's a key reason, though, why Lawson will be the one to break the cycle, and it won't be the definition of insanity.
But the definition of insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change.
It's that Red Bull this time really need to start securing their future for after Max Verstappen leaves. And they think that Liam might be the man for that. Since 2016, they've been putting all of their eggs in the Max Verstappen basket. And that basket is starting to wear thin and drop eggs onto small children's heads. Max is getting sick of F1, mostly with all the shite you have to do other than driving. And having already cemented himself as one of the greats in the sport, Max has other goals such as Le Mans outside of Formula One. And Christian Spice Girls Horner knows that. So he's got to secure Red Bull's future with a strong driver in the next few years. Thankfully for Liam, he is guaranteed to do well if he just watches the long form content. Do you think Liam will perform well, or will it just be another Albon Gasly situation? Let me know, because I enjoy reading your opinions on this in the comments section. Even the brain dead comments I somehow enjoy reading. And if you did make it this far into my yap, you might as well subscribe, considering you made it this far into my yap. It really does help the channel out, and again, thank you to the channel members who've been supporting this content. Thanks so much for watching, and goodbye!